A gunshot split the evening air as Belinda Wells stood on the porch of her boarding house, dust swirling around her skirts as Sheriff Grimes approached with fury etched into every line of his weathered face. It was 1878 in the unforgiving town of Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, and her world was about to shatter. 3 days, Miss Wells, the sheriff announced loudly enough for the gathering onlookers to hear. You have 3 days to pack up and leave Silver Creek for good. Belinda clutched the porch railing, her knuckles white. On what grounds? I've broken no laws. Your establishment brings trouble. That shootout last night was the final straw. Sheriff Grimes adjusted his badge, glinting in the sunset. Town council's decision is final. From the gathering crowd, a tall figure stepped forward. His worn leather vest and sun-darkened skin marked him as a man who lived in the saddle. Colt Quinn removed his hat, revealing dark hair and eyes that held the sheriff's gaze without flinching. Then we'll both leave together, he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. The boarding house had been Belinda's fresh start after her husband's death 2 years ago. At 26, she'd built it from nothing, providing respectable lodging for travelers passing through Silver Creek. The shootout hadn't been her fault, just 2 drunk cowboys settling a dispute that had erupted onto her property. But Sheriff Grimes had been looking for an excuse to shut her down since she refused his improper advances months ago. Colt Quinn was a regular at her establishment, though not in the way the rumors suggested. He took meals there when in town and occasionally rented a room between his long cattle drives. They had shared conversations but little more. His sudden declaration left her speechless. This isn't your fight, Quinn, Sheriff Grimes warned, hand hovering near his pistol. Seems it is now. Colt stepped closer to the porch, positioning himself between Belinda and the sheriff. Miss Wells runs the only decent establishment in this town, and we all know why you're really shutting her down. A murmur rippled through the gathered townsfolk. Everyone knew of the sheriff's propositions and Belinda's refusals. You're making a mistake, Cowboy, Grimes snarled. Wouldn't be my first. Colt's smile didn't reach his eyes. Miss Wells, may I have a word inside? Belinda nodded, her heart pounding as she led the way into her boarding house. The common room was empty, the evening meal not yet prepared. Mr. Quinn, while I appreciate the gesture, you can't just throw away your position here. You've worked for the Double B Ranch for years. Belinda smoothed her apron, a nervous habit. Colt placed his hat on the table. Been thinking of moving on anyway. Montana Territory's opening up. Good land, fewer troubles. He studied her face. You don't deserve what they're doing to you, Miss Wells. I hardly know you, Mr. Quinn. You know enough. I'm 32, never been married, no family to speak of. I work hard, drink little, and pay my debts. He leaned against the wall. And I've watched you run this place with more dignity than this town deserves for 2 years now. Belinda sank into a chair, the weight of her situation settling on her shoulders. I have nowhere to go. That's what I'm offering. Not marriage, not yet, that'd be too forward, but partnership, protection on the trail north. After that, you decide. You do that for a woman you barely know, Colt's expression softened. Sometimes you just know when something's right, Miss Wells. I'm not a man for fancy words, but I've admired you since the first day I walked in here. Outside, the crowd had dispersed, but Belinda knew Sheriff Grimes wouldn't back down. The town council was in his pocket, and she had 3 days to leave everything she'd built behind. If I agree, what then? We just leave together. I have money saved, enough to start over. He hesitated. There's a parcel of land in Montana Territory I've had my eye on. Good water, good grazing, room for a house. And a boarding house, Belinda asked, surprising herself, if that's what you want. She stood, smoothing her skirts. I need to think, Mr. Quinn. Call me Colt, please. He retrieved his hat. I'll be back tomorrow for your answer. After he left, Belinda climbed the stairs to her small room at the end of the hall. From the window, she could see most of Silver Creek, the general store, the saloon, the small church at the edge of town. This had been her home, her salvation after losing everything. Leaving seemed impossible, but staying had become dangerous. Sheriff Grimes wasn't a man who took rejection well. The threats had escalated over months, and now he'd found his excuse. If she refused to leave, what might he do next? Morning came too quickly. Belinda rose before dawn, as was her habit, to prepare breakfast for her boarders. As she worked, kneading dough for biscuits, her mind turned over Colt Quinn's proposition. She barely knew him, yet there was something reassuring in his steady gaze, something trustworthy in his straightforward manner. The bell above the door jingled as Abigail Porter, the dressmaker's wife and Belinda's closest friend, rushed in. "Is it true?" Abigail asked breathlessly. "Grimes is forcing you out," Belinda nodded, sliding the biscuits into the oven. 3 days' notice. That's criminal. "And what's this about Colt Quinn? The whole town's talking. He offered to leave with me. Protection on the road north." Abigail's eyes widened. "North to where?" "Montana territory. He says there's land opportunity." "Do you trust him?" Belinda paused, considering. "I think I do. He's always been honorable in his dealings here. They say he was a cavalry scout during the war, though he never speaks of it." Abigail lowered her voice. "And that he once tracked a horse thief for 300 miles before bringing him to justice. I can't say if those stories are true." Belinda poured coffee for them both. "But I know he's never caused trouble here." Pays promptly, speaks respectfully. "It's a bold move, leaving with him." Abigail stirred sugar into her coffee, but perhaps a necessary one. "Grimes has become increasingly unstable since you refused him. What choice do I have? Stay and face whatever he plans next." The boarding house filled with the morning's guests coming down for breakfast. Belinda served them efficiently, her mind elsewhere. By mid-morning, the dining room had emptied, and she began cleaning up when the bell jingled again. Colt Quinn entered, hat in hand, looking freshly shaved. "Morning, Miss Wells." "Mr. Quinn." She gestured to a table. "Coffee," he nodded, taking a seat. "Have you thought about my offer?" "I have." She poured his coffee, then sat across from him. "If I accept, I want to be clear about the arrangement. I won't be beholden to you or any man. Wouldn't expect you to be." He sipped his coffee. "You'd be free to build whatever life you choose once we reach Montana. And if that life doesn't include you," his eyes met hers steadily, "then I'd respect your decision, but I hope you might give me a chance to prove myself worthy of consideration." Belinda studied him, this man who was offering to append his life for her. Why risk everything for me?" "Because it's the right thing to do." He set his cup down. "And because I've watched you these 2 years, how you treat people, how hard you work. A woman like you deserves better than being run out of town by a corrupt sheriff." The sincerity in his voice moved her more than flowery declarations might have. "I accept your offer, Mr. Quinn Colt. But I have conditions." "Name them." "We travel as business partners, separate sleeping arrangements, and I pay my own way with what I can get from selling this place." "Agreed." He extended his hand and she took it. His palm was calloused but warm. "We should leave at first light the day after tomorrow. Less chance of Grimes causing trouble." "So soon?" "The longer we wait, the more time he has to make things difficult. Can you be ready?" Belinda mentally catalogued her possessions. The furniture would have to stay, but she could pack her personal items, her mother's silver, the small library of books she'd collected. "Yes," she decided. "I can be ready." "Good, I'll make arrangements for the journey. We'll need a wagon for your things." He stood, placing coins on the table for the coffee. "Pack light but practical. It's a long trail to Montana." After he left, Belinda sat alone in her dining room, the magnitude of her decision washing over her. In 2 days, she would leave behind the life she'd built and venture into the unknown with a man she barely knew. That afternoon, Belinda visited the bank, withdrawing her savings. The banker, Mr. Phillips, expressed regret at her departure but offered no support against the sheriff's edict. Next, she called on her attorney, arranging a quick sale of the boarding house to Abigail Porter and her husband for far less than its worth. The Porters protested the low price, but Belinda insisted she needed the transaction completed before she departed. As she walked back to the boarding house, Sheriff Grimes intercepted her on the boardwalk. "Heard you're actually leaving with that saddle tramp," he said, blocking her path. "Didn't figure you for that type. Please move aside, Sheriff." Belinda kept her voice level, though her heart raced. "You know, this could all be avoided." He leaned closer, his breath sour with whiskey despite the early hour. "One dinner, a little friendliness. I could convince the council to reconsider. I believe I've made my position clear on that matter." She attempted to step around him. He grabbed her arm. You'd rather run off with Quinn than be reasonable with me. That's a poor choice, Belinda. Let go of me. She pulled against his grip. Now, everything all right here? The voice came from behind them. Belinda turned to see Thomas Henderson, the blacksmith, approaching with a concerned expression. Sheriff Grimes released her arm. Just having a conversation with Miss Wells. Didn't look like much of a conversation to me. Thomas crossed his arms, his blacksmith's build imposing even to the sheriff. Miss Wells, can I escort you somewhere? Yes, thank you. I was returning to my boarding house. As they walked away, Belinda's hands trembled. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Man's getting out of hand, Thomas muttered. Half the town's talking about it. Not everyone agrees with what he's doing, but folks are scared to stand against him. It doesn't matter now. I'm leaving day after tomorrow. With Quinn. When she nodded, he continued, known Colt for years. He's a good man. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but he's got a solid reputation among those who matter. This unexpected endorsement soothed some of Belinda's anxiety. I hope you're right. That evening, as Belinda served the last supper her boarding house would offer, word had spread of her departure. Several regular patrons expressed their dismay, a few even offering to speak to the town council on her behalf. But Belinda had made her decision. Silver Creek was no longer her home. After the last guest retired, she sat at her desk tallying accounts and writing letters to her few remaining suppliers to cancel outstanding orders. A soft knock at the door startled her. Colt stood on her porch, a long package under his arm. May I come in? She ushered him into the empty dining room. Is everything prepared for our departure? Nearly. Wagons secured, supplies purchased. He placed the package on the table. This is for you. Belinda unwrapped the oilcloth to reveal a Winchester rifle, its wood stock gleaming in the lamplight. Every woman heading to frontier country should know how to use one, Colt explained. It's clean, reliable, and not too heavy for you to handle. Belinda lifted the weapon, feeling its weight. After her husband's death, she'd sold his guns, having no use for them. I don't know how to shoot. I can teach you. We'll have time on the trail. She rewrapped the rifle. Thank you, it's a thoughtful gift if somewhat alarming. The journey won't be easy, Colt said, his expression serious. 3 weeks, maybe more, depending on weather and trail conditions. We'll pass through territories where law is scarce. I understand the risks. Belinda set the package aside. I've made my arrangements here. The boarding house is sold, my affairs in order. Good, he hesitated. There's something else you should know. Grimes has been asking questions about my past, digging for dirt. He won't let this go easily. What will he find? Belinda asked directly. Nothing that should concern you. I've had my share of trouble, but nothing dishonorable. Colt met her gaze. I was a Union scout during the war. After I rode with a cattle company in Texas, had some disagreements with local law there over water rights. Nothing that would endanger you. Belinda appreciated his honesty. We all have pasts, Mr. Quinn. I judge people by their present actions. As do I, Miss Wells. He stood. I'll return at dawn the day after tomorrow with the wagon. Be ready. That night, Belinda packed her belongings, carefully selecting what to take and what to leave behind. Clothes, practical for traveling and the new life ahead. Books that had been her companions during lonely evenings. Her mother's silver and the quilt her grandmother had made. The portrait of her late husband, William, who had died of typhoid 2 years after they'd moved west to start anew. What would you think of this, William? She whispered to the portrait before wrapping it carefully. Me, heading to Montana Territory with a cowboy I barely know. The next day passed in a blur of activity. Belinda settled accounts with her remaining boarders, endured tearful goodbyes from Abigail and a few other friends, and completed the sale of the boarding house. By evening, her room was bare except for the bed and the trunk containing what she would take. She slept fitfully, waking before dawn to dress in her traveling clothes, a practical skirt of sturdy brown wool, a white blouse, and a fitted jacket. Her blonde hair was pinned securely beneath a plain bonnet. As the first light of dawn colored the sky, she heard the rattle of wagon wheels outside. Colt waited by a canvas-covered wagon pulled by 4 strong horses. He wore his usual attire work clothes, a worn leather vest and his hat, but had added a heavy coat for the journey. A saddle was secured to the wagon's side. Your horse? Belinda asked, nodding to a chestnut gelding tethered to the back of the wagon. "Yes, madam. Storm's been with me 5 years now." He helped load her trunk and the few boxes she'd packed. "We'll make better time if I ride alongside some days, but I can drive the wagon too." Belinda climbed onto the wagon seat, settling her skirts. The streets of Silver Creek were quiet, most residents still abed. She took a last look at the boarding house that had been her home and livelihood. "Ready?" Colt asked, climbing up beside her. "Yes." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm ready." He flicked the reins, and the horses moved forward, the wagon rolling down Silver Creek's main street toward the northern trail. They had just passed the town limits when the sound of galloping hooves approached from behind. Sheriff Grimes and 2 deputies pulled their horses alongside the wagon. "Stop right there, Quinn." Colt reined in the horses, his expression guarded. "What's the problem, Sheriff? Got a wire from Texas yesterday. Seems you're wanted for questioning about a shooting in Lerdo 3 years back." Belinda's heart sank. Had Colt lied to her about his past? "That was settled long ago," Colt replied calmly. "Self-defense cleared by the local judge. You can wire Judge Callahan in Lerdo if you don't believe me." "Maybe I will, but until then, you're staying in Silver Creek." Grimes gestured to his deputies. "Johnson, escort Miss Wells back to town. She can stay at my place until she makes proper arrangements." "I will do no such thing," Belinda said firmly. "I've sold my property and am free to leave. Not with a wanted man, you aren't." Grimes reached for his pistol. In one smooth motion, Colt drew his own weapon. "Think carefully, Grimes. You know that wire's false. This is just your wounded pride talking." The tension crackled between them. The deputies shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting armed confrontations so early in the morning. "Sheriff," a new voice called. Thomas Henderson rode up, followed by several townsmen including the mayor. "Put that gun away. Stay out of this, Henderson. Official business." The mayor, a portly man usually firmly in Grimes's pocket, surprised them all by speaking up. "Is it official?" "Because the town council never authorized this pursuit." "Got a wire about Quinn, strange," Thomas interrupted, "since I was at the telegraph office when it opened this morning, sending a message to my brother. No wires had come in about Mr. Quinn." The sheriff's face reddened. One of his deputies exchanged a glance with the other, then backed his horse away slightly. "You're overstepping, Grimes," the mayor said. "Miss Wells has complied with your order to leave town. Let her go." For a moment, it seemed the sheriff might ignore them all. His hand still hovered near his gun, his eyes locked with Colt's. Then, with a curse, he turned his horse. "You'll regret crossing me," he snarled at Colt. "Both of you will." The sheriff spurred his horse back toward town, one deputy following quickly. The other lingered a moment. "Sorry about this, Miss Wells," he said quietly. "Never agreed with how this was handled." After the lawman departed, Thomas Henderson approached the wagon. "You'd best get moving. He'll be back once his temper cools, probably with some new scheme." "Thank you, Thomas," Belinda said. "And please thank the mayor." Thomas nodded. "Safe travels to you both. Quinn, take good care of her." Colt tipped his hat to the blacksmith, then flicked the reins. The wagon rolled forward again, leaving Silver Creek behind. They traveled in silence for several miles, putting distance between themselves and the town. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the spring air. Was what Grimes said true? Belinda finally asked. About Lerdo, Colt kept his eyes on the trail. Partly. There was a shooting. Man drew on me in a saloon, claimed I'd cheated at cards. I hadn't, but he was drunk and angry. I was faster. He glanced at her. Judge ruled it self-defense. I have the papers to prove it. Why didn't you tell me? Didn't think it would follow me here. His hands tightened on the reins. I'm not proud of it, but I won't apologize for defending myself. Belinda studied his profile, the strong jaw set with determination, the eyes scanning the horizon. I believe you. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Thank you. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. Belinda stretched her legs, already feeling the stiffness from hours on the hard wagon seat. How far will we get today? She asked, accepting the cup of coffee Colt offered. There's a small way station about 20 miles ahead. We can stop there tonight, get a proper meal, and rest. He leaned against the wagon wheel. After that, settlements get scarce for a while. The reality of what she'd undertaken began to sink in. Weeks of travel through wilderness, sleeping under stars or in crude shelters, enduring whatever weather came their way. All with a man she was only beginning to know. Having second thoughts, Colt asked, reading her expression. No, Belinda answered truthfully. Just acknowledging the challenges ahead. We'll manage. He finished his coffee. Ready to continue, the afternoon passed slowly, the wagon rumbling over increasingly rough terrain as they left the well-traveled roads near Silver Creek. Colt pointed out landmarks, naming distant mountains and explaining how to read the landscape for signs of water and shelter. His knowledge of the country impressed Belinda, who had never ventured far from established settlements. By evening they reached the way station, a crude but solid building offering meals and basic lodging for travelers. A stable stood nearby for horses, and a small garden suggested some attempt at self-sufficiency. The proprietor, a grizzled man named Jenkins, greeted them with minimal curiosity. "One room for the lady," Colt requested, placing coins on the rough-hewn counter. "I'll sleep in the wagon." Jenkins raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. He led Belinda to a small, clean room with a narrow bed and washstand. "Supper's in half an hour, nothing fancy, but it's hot." After he left, Belinda unpacked her nightgown and a change of clothes for the morning. The small window offered a view of the stable yard, where Colt was tending to the horses, removing their harnesses and rubbing them down with practiced efficiency. She washed her face and hands, combed her hair, and changed her travel-dusty blouse before joining the handful of other travelers in the main room for supper. Colt entered shortly after, his hat in his hands, hair damp from washing up at the outdoor pump. The meal was simple stew, biscuits, and strong coffee, but satisfying after the long day's travel. Conversation around the communal table was sparse, mostly concerned with trail conditions and weather. No one questioned why a respectable-looking woman was traveling with a cowboy, for which Belinda was grateful. After the meal, Colt walked her to her room door. "Lock this behind me," he instructed quietly. "I'll be close by if you need anything." "You don't have to sleep in the wagon," Belinda said. "Surely there's another room." "Jenkins only has 3 rooms, all taken. The wagon's fine, I've slept in worse places." He hesitated. "We should reach Fairfield in 4 days. It's a proper town, bigger than Silver Creek." "We can rest there, resupply. 4 more days of driving." Belinda couldn't hide her dismay. The day's journey had left her sore and tired. "It gets easier," Colt assured her. "Your body adjusts to the rhythm of it." She nodded, then asked the question that had been on her mind since morning. "Do you think Sheriff Grimes will follow us?" "Possibly. Not alone, he's not that foolish, but he might send word ahead to cause trouble." Colt's expression darkened. "Don't worry, we'll be careful, stick to less traveled routes where we can." "Good night then, Mr. Quinn." "Colt," he reminded her gently. "Good night, Miss Wells." "Belinda," she replied. "If we're to be traveling companions for weeks, we should use our given names." A smile touched his lips. "Good night, Belinda." Sleep came quickly despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the events of the day. Belinda woke to birdsong and the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly and found Colt already at the breakfast table studying a map. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Hope you slept well." "Better than expected." She accepted the coffee Jenkins's wife poured for her. "Is that our route?" Colt nodded, turning the map so she could see it better. "We'll follow the North Fork River for the next 2 days, then cut northwest toward the mountains. There's a pass here," he indicated a spot with his finger. "That's usually clear this time of year. And then Montana, not quite yet. We cross into Idaho territory first, follow the Snake River Valley for a spell, then north into Montana." He folded the map. "It's a long journey, but the land at the end is worth it. Good water, timber, grassland for cattle. You speak as if you've seen it." "I have. Rode through last summer on a cattle drive. That's when I staked my claim." His eyes lit with enthusiasm. "There's a creek running through the property, hills to the north that shelter it from the worst winter winds, good soil in the valley." His vision was compelling, and Belinda found herself imagining the place a house by the creek, perhaps a garden, even another boarding house for travelers on the new frontier. It was more hope than she'd allowed herself since William's death. They departed after breakfast, the day promising fair weather. Colt rode alongside the wagon for the morning, pointing out interesting sights and occasionally sharing stories of his previous travels through the region. His knowledge and calm confidence gradually eased Belinda's anxiety about the journey. By midday, they stopped near a small stream to rest the horses and eat. Colt helped Belinda down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Thank you," she said, stepping away quickly. "My legs are grateful for the respite. It'll get easier," he promised again. "By week's end, you'll be an experienced traveler." They shared a simple meal in companionable silence, the only sounds the burbling of the stream and the horses cropping grass nearby. Afterward, Colt surprised her by producing the Winchester rifle he'd given her. "Thought we might start those shooting lessons," he suggested, "if you're willing." Belinda hesitated. The weapon represented a level of self-reliance she hadn't considered necessary before, but the encounter with Sheriff Grimes had reminded her how vulnerable she was. "Very well," she agreed, "though I can't imagine I'll be very good at it." "Just takes practice, like anything else." He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight along the barrel, how to steady her breathing before pulling the trigger. His instructions were patient and clear. When she fired for the first time, the recoil surprised her, but the bullet hit the tree trunk Colt had designated as a target not in the center as his had, but close enough to count as a success. "Well done," he praised. "You're a natural." Belinda doubted that but felt a small surge of pride nonetheless. "It's heavier than it looks. You'll build strength with practice." He took the rifle, checking it was unloaded before returning it to its case. "We should move on if we want to make our night camp before dark." That evening they made camp by the river with no settlement in sight. Colt efficiently set up a small tent for Belinda, built a fire, and prepared a simple supper of beans, bacon, and coffee. The domesticity of it struck Belinda as oddly comforting. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked, accepting the tin plate he offered. "Necessity." He settled across the fire from her. "Man gets tired of burnt beans pretty quick when he's on his own." "You've been on your own a long time," Colt nodded, his expression thoughtful in the firelight. "Left home at 16. Father was a hard man, quick with his fists. Mother died when I was 12 after that." He shrugged. "Wasn't much reason to stay. I'm sorry." Belinda couldn't imagine sending a boy of 16 out into the world alone. It must have been difficult. Found work on a cattle ranch in Texas. Owner took me in, treated me fair, taught me the business. A faint smile crossed his face. "Good man, Mr. Barton. Died in 69, but by then I knew enough to make my own way. And you've been moving ever since, more or less." Drove cattle, scouted for the Army a spell, worked ranches from Texas to Wyoming. He studied her across the flames. "What about you? How did a lady like yourself end up running a boarding house in Silver Creek?" Belinda set her empty plate aside. "My husband William and I came west from Philadelphia in 74. He had dreams of establishing a mercantile business in the new territories. We made it as far as Silver Creek before typhoid took him." "I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you." The pain had dulled with time, but speaking of William still brought a pang of sadness. "I was 24, alone in a strange town. The boarding house was William's last purchase, a building he intended to renovate into a store. I decided to make it work as lodging instead. And you did. Made it the most respectable place in town, until Sheriff Grimes decided otherwise." Belinda gazed into the fire. "I've never told anyone this, but he proposed to me 6 months ago. When I refused, that's when the trouble began." Colt's expression hardened. "Man can't take rejection like a gentleman. He's no man at all." "No," Belinda agreed softly. "He's not." They sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire and the distant hooting of an owl the only sounds. The night sky above was brilliant with stars, more than Belinda had ever noticed from town. "It's beautiful out here," she murmured. "One of the reasons I prefer open country." Colt added wood to the fire. "Cities have their advantages, but give me stars overhead any night." Later, as Belinda settled into her tent on the bedroll Colt had prepared, she listened to him moving around the camp, checking the horses, banking the fire. There was comfort in his presence, a sense of security she hadn't expected. Despite the uncertainties ahead, she slept soundly. The next week established a routine. They rose at dawn, broke camp, and traveled until midday. After a brief rest, they continued until evening when Colt would find a suitable campsite, preferably near water. Each night he set up Belinda's tent and prepared their meal. Each morning, he packed everything efficiently while she made coffee. When they could, they stayed at way stations or small settlements, but such opportunities were increasingly rare as they moved farther from established routes. Belinda surprised herself by adapting quickly to the rigors of trail life. Her hands, once soft from indoor work, toughened. Her body grew accustomed to the wagon's constant motion. She learned to help with camp duties, to harness the horses, even to drive the wagon for short stretches while Colt rode ahead to scout. More surprising was her growing comfort with Colt's company. Their conversations deepened beyond practicalities to personal histories, beliefs, hopes for the future. She learned that he read voraciously when opportunity allowed, preferring history and adventure tales. He discovered her fondness for poetry and her skill with numbers, honed from managing the boarding house accounts. One evening, as they camped by a small lake nestled among pine-covered hills, Colt returned from hunting with 2 rabbits for their supper. As he prepared them for the spit, Belinda found herself watching his hands, capable, confident in their movements. "You're staring," he noted without looking up. Belinda flushed. "I was just thinking how different this is from my life a month ago. Better or worse?" He glanced at her then, his expression curious. "Different," she repeated. Then, more honestly, "Better in many ways. I didn't realize how confined I felt in Silver Creek until I left it behind. Freedom has that effect." He placed the rabbits on the spit over the fire. "Some people spend their whole lives never knowing it. Is that why you've never settled in one place? For freedom?" Colt considered the question. "Partly. Also never found a reason compelling enough to stay put. Land, yes, but land alone isn't enough." The implication hung between them, unspoken but understood. Belinda busied herself preparing the coffee, uncomfortable with the direction of her thoughts. This arrangement was practical, not romantic. Yet increasingly, she found herself drawn to this quiet, competent man. That night, a storm blew in suddenly, rain lashing their camp and wind threatening to collapse Belinda's tent. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by thunderclaps that made the horses nervous. Colt appeared at her tent flap, rain dripping from his hat brim. "This won't hold," he shouted over the wind. "We need to move to more sheltered ground." They hastily packed what they could, Colt leading the frightened horses while Belinda clutched her most valuable possessions. They found refuge in a small cave in the hillside, barely large enough for them and their essential gear. The horses were tethered just outside, under an overhang that offered some protection. Inside, they spread a bedroll on the rocky floor. Colt lit a small lantern, its glow creating a warm circle in the darkness. Outside, the storm raged unabated. "You're soaked through," Colt observed, concern in his voice. "You should change into something dry." Belinda nodded, shivering. "Turn around, please." He obliged, facing the cave wall while she quickly changed into her nightgown and wrapped a blanket around herself for modesty and warmth. Her wet clothes she hung from a protruding rock, hoping they would dry somewhat by morning. "You can turn back now." Colt had removed his wet coat and boots but remained otherwise dressed. He sat at the cave's entrance watching the storm. "You should change too," Belinda urged. "You'll catch your death in those wet clothes." He shook his head. "I'll be fine, you get some sleep." "Don't be foolish. We've traveled too far for you to fall ill from pride." She turned her back. "I won't look." After a moment's hesitation, she heard him moving, changing into dry clothes. When he said she could turn back, she found him in a dry shirt and trousers, his wet things hung alongside hers. The close confines of the cave made their usual careful distance impossible. They sat side by side, sharing the warmth of a blanket as the temperature dropped with the storm. "Will the wagon be safe?" Belinda asked, concerned about their possessions. "Tied it down as best I could and covered everything with the canvas. It's weathered worse." His shoulder pressed against hers as he shifted position. "Sorry about the accommodations. Better than being out in that." She nodded toward the storm. Lightning illuminated the landscape briefly, followed by a tremendous crash of thunder that seemed to shake the very hills. Belinda jumped at the sound, instinctively grabbing Colt's arm. His hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. "Just noise," he said softly. "We're safe here." She didn't remove her hand, and neither did he. They sat in silence, listening to the storm, the lantern's flame casting their shadows against the cave wall. Gradually, Belinda's head drooped with exhaustion until it rested on Colt's shoulder. "You should lie down," he suggested. "Get some proper rest. What about you? I'll keep watch. Make sure the horses don't spook." Too tired to argue, Belinda lay down on the bedroll. Colt adjusted the blanket over her, his hand lingering a moment on her shoulder. "Sleep well, Belinda." She murmured a response, already drifting off to the sound of rain and Colt's steady breathing beside her. When she woke, sunlight streamed into the cave. Colt was gone, but she could hear him moving outside. She quickly dressed in her now dry clothes from yesterday and emerged to find him checking the horses. "Morning," he greeted her. "Storm passed about dawn, wagons intact, though one of our flour sacks got wet. That's fortunate." She stretched, working out the stiffness from sleeping on hard ground. "Thank you for finding shelter last night. Got lucky with this cave." He handed her a cup of coffee he'd already prepared. "We should reach Fairfield by afternoon if we make good time." The prospect of a proper town with real beds and hot baths lifted Belinda's spirits considerably. They broke camp efficiently, loaded the wagon, and were on their way within the hour. Fairfield proved to be significantly larger than Silver Creek, with several streets of buildings including a hotel, 2 saloons, a church, and various businesses. The bustle of activity struck Belinda as almost overwhelming after days on the quiet trail. Colt secured rooms at the hotel again, separate accommodations and stabling for the horses. "We'll rest here 2 days," he told Belinda. "Resupply, let the horses recover, maybe even find you a proper dress shop." The hotel room, though simple, seemed luxurious after tent camping. Belinda indulged in a hot bath, washing away trail dust and fatigue. Afterward, wearing her cleanest dress, she ventured into town to purchase necessities: thread for mending, hairpins, soap, and a few personal items. The general store was well stocked, the proprietor friendly without being overly curious about a woman traveling through. As Belinda selected her purchases, she overheard a conversation between 2 men at the counter. "Telegraph came in yesterday. Sheriff from down Silver Creek Way, asking about a woman and a cowboy heading north." "What's he want with them?" "Didn't say exactly. Something about the man being wanted for questioning. Quinn, I think the name was." Belinda's heart raced. Sheriff Grimes had indeed sent word ahead. She finished her shopping quickly and hurried back to the hotel, where she found Colt in the dining room studying his maps. "We have a problem," she said quietly, sliding into the chair opposite him. "Sheriff Grimes has telegraphed ahead about us." Colt's expression remained calm, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. "What exactly did you hear?" She relayed the conversation from the store. "Do you think they'll try to detain us?" "Not without an official warrant, which Grimes doesn't have." He folded his map, "But we should be careful." "I'll ask around, see what else is being said. Meanwhile, you should stay close to the hotel." "I'm not hiding in my room like a fugitive. We've done nothing wrong." Colt studied her, a hint of admiration in his gaze. "No, we haven't, but caution isn't cowardice." That evening, they dined in the hotel restaurant, both dressed in their best clothes, Colt in a clean white shirt and dark vest, Belinda in her blue traveling dress, her hair arranged more carefully than had been possible on the trail. "You look lovely," Colt said simply as she joined him. "Thank you." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "You clean up well yourself, Mr. Quinn." The meal was excellent after days of trail cooking, and Belinda savored every bite. Halfway through, however, their pleasant evening was interrupted by the arrival of a tall man wearing a marshal's badge. "Mr. Quinn." The marshal approached their table. "I'm Marshal Davis. Mind if I have a word?" Colt stood, his manner respectful but wary. "Not at all, Marshal." "Would you care to join us? Rather speak privately if you don't mind." His gaze shifted to Belinda. "Madam." "Whatever you have to say can be said in front of Miss Wells," Colt replied firmly. The marshal shrugged. "Received a telegraph from Sheriff Grimes in Silver Creek." Says you're wanted for questioning regarding a shooting in Lerdo. That matter was settled 3 years ago, Marshal. Self-defense, ruled by Judge Callahan himself. Colt's voice remained even. Sheriff Grimes is using old business to harass us because Miss Wells refused his advances and left town under his order. Marshal Davis raised an eyebrow. Is that so, madam? It is, Belinda confirmed, meeting his gaze steadily. Sheriff Grimes gave me 3 days to leave town, which I did. Now he seems determined to cause trouble despite getting what he wanted. The marshal studied them both. Grimes didn't mention any of that, just said to detain you if possible. Do you intend to? Colt asked quietly, not without proper cause, which this doesn't seem to be. Marshal Davis adjusted his hat. But I'd advise you not to linger in Fairfield. Grimes struck me as the persistent type. We'll be moving on tomorrow, Colt assured him. After the marshal left, Belinda released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was fortunate. Not all lawmen are like Grimes, Colt observed. Many are decent men trying to do right. Will this follow us the entire way to Montana? Not likely. Grimes's influence only stretches so far, and he'd need a proper warrant to pursue us across territories. Colt reached across the table, briefly touching her hand. Try not to worry. We're making good progress, and I won't let anything happen to you. His touch and the quiet conviction in his voice steadied her. I believe you. They departed Fairfield the next morning, earlier than originally planned. The town was barely stirring as their wagon rolled north, toward increasingly rugged country. The encounter with Marshal Davis had left Belinda unsettled, but also more determined. Sheriff Grimes's vindictiveness only confirmed she'd made the right decision to leave Silver Creek. The trail grew more challenging as they approached the mountains, winding through forests and across rocky terrain. Colt rode ahead more often, scouting the path and watching for potential dangers. They encountered few travelers, mostly fur trappers or prospectors heading into the high country. One evening, camped in a small meadow surrounded by towering pines, Colt returned from hunting with a young deer over his horse's back. As he prepared it, Belinda found herself once again impressed by his self-sufficiency. Where did you learn to hunt? She asked, helping to collect wood for a larger fire than usual. My father taught me when I was young, before things went bad between us. Colt worked efficiently, his knife sure in its movements. Later, during the war, I refined the skill. A scout who can't feed himself isn't much use. You don't speak much about the war, not much worth telling. His expression closed slightly. Saw things no man should see, did things I'm not proud of, though I believed in the cause. Belinda sensed his reluctance and changed the subject. How much further to the Montana border? About a week, weather permitting. We'll cross through a pass that's challenging but passable this time of year. He glanced up at the sky. Though we might see snow yet before we're through. The venison roasted over their fire, filling the air with a mouth-watering aroma. As they ate, Belinda realized how much she'd come to appreciate these quiet evenings with Colt. His company had become comfortable, his presence reassuring in ways she hadn't expected when they'd left Silver Creek. Penny for your thoughts, Colt said, noticing her contemplative expression. I was just thinking how strange life can be. A month ago, I never would have imagined myself here, eating venison in a mountain meadow with you. Regrets. His tone was light, but she sensed the genuine question beneath. No, Belinda answered truthfully. I'm beginning to think Sheriff Grimes did me a favor in a way. I might have stayed in Silver Creek forever, never knowing what else the world held. Colt smiled, the expression warming his usually serious features. That's a good way to look at it. As darkness fell completely, the temperature dropped sharply. Belinda moved closer to the fire, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Without comment, Colt retrieved a blanket from the wagon and placed it around her. Thank you. She looked up at him, standing tall beside her seat on a fallen log. For everything, Colt, not just the blanket, but for helping me leave Silver Creek, for protecting me on this journey. You're welcome. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Though you've proven remarkably capable yourself, most women I know wouldn't have handled this journey half as well. I've had a good teacher. They sat in companionable silence, watching the flames dance. The night was clear, stars brilliant above the treetops. An owl called somewhere in the darkness. It's peaceful here, Belinda murmured. That it is. Colt's voice was soft. Montana's like this, peaceful, but with a wildness to it, room to breathe, to build something lasting. Tell me more about your land there. He described it again, more detailed this time, the creek running through a valley flanked by gentle hills, the stands of pine and aspen, the meadows where cattle could graze. The southern exposure perfect for a house, sheltered from the worst winter winds. The nearby town of Pine Creek, small but growing, where supplies could be purchased and crops or cattle sold. It sounds wonderful, Belinda said when he finished. A perfect place to start anew. That's my hope. He hesitated, then added, our hope if you decide to stay. The statement hung between them, laden with meaning. Belinda felt her heart quicken. Since William's death, she'd guarded herself against such possibilities, focused solely on survival and independence. Yet here, with this man beside her in the wilderness, she found herself considering a different future. I'd like to see it first, she said carefully, before making any decisions, of course. Colt nodded, understanding in his expression. No pressure, Belinda. Whatever you decide when we reach Montana, I'll respect it. The following days brought them higher into the mountains, the trail narrowing and becoming more treacherous in places. Colt drove the wagon with expert precision, navigating switchbacks and rocky passages that would have terrified Belinda a month earlier. Now, she watched with appreciation, occasionally holding her breath at particularly difficult stretches, but trusting in his skills. Their conversation during these challenging sections was minimal, Colt focused on the trail and Belinda not wanting to distract him. But in the evenings, their talks continued, ranging widely across topics from books they'd read to dreams they harbored. Colt spoke of building not just a ranch, but a home, something he'd never truly had since leaving his father's house as a boy. Belinda shared her hope of perhaps opening another boarding house, or even a small school, having briefly taught children in Philadelphia before her marriage. As they neared the highest point of the mountain pass, snow began to fall light at first, then heavier. The temperature dropped rapidly, and Colt called a halt earlier than usual, finding shelter in a small stand of pines that offered some protection from the wind. We'll wait it out here, he decided, helping Belinda from the wagon. Could be worse by morning, or it might pass. Either way, better to be cautious. They set up camp quickly, the routine now familiar to both. Colt constructed a lean-to against the wagon, larger than Belinda's usual tent and sturdier against the wind and snow. Inside, he laid both their bedrolls, side by side. Seeing her questioning look, he explained, too cold tonight for separate sleeping. We'll need the shared warmth. Belinda nodded, practical considerations overriding propriety. The cold was bitter, the wind cutting through even her heaviest coat. Colt built a fire as close to the lean-to as was safe, preparing a hot meal and making sure the horses were sheltered and fed. By the time they'd eaten, darkness had fallen completely and the snowfall had intensified. They retreated to the lean-to, sitting on their bedrolls with the fire's glow illuminating the small space. Will the pass still be passable tomorrow? Belinda asked, huddling in her blankets. Depends how much snow we get. Might need to wait a day if it's too deep. Colt added wood to the fire, sparks flying upward into the dark. We're well supplied and the horses are strong. We'll manage. His confidence reassured her, as it had throughout their journey. Belinda watched him tending the fire, his profile strong in the flickering light, and felt a surge of emotion she could no longer deny. Over these weeks of travel, of shared hardships and quiet conversations, she had come to care deeply for this man, his strength, his kindness, his unwavering integrity. When he returned to sit beside her, she asked a question that had been on her mind for days. Colt, why did you really offer to leave with me that day in Silver Creek? The truth. He was silent for a long moment, gazing into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low. Because I couldn't bear to see you forced out alone. Because I'd watched you for 2 years, your courage, your dignity despite Grimes's harassment. Because I'd wanted to speak to you properly for months, but never found the right moment. He turned to face her. Because sometimes a man recognizes what matters, even if it means turning his life upside down. The honesty in his words touched Belinda deeply. I'm glad you did, she whispered. His hand found hers atop the blanket, fingers intertwining. So am I. The howling wind and falling snow isolated them from the world, creating an intimacy that had been building between them for weeks. When Colt leaned toward her, his intention clear in his eyes, Belinda met him halfway. Their kiss was gentle at first, questioning, then deepened with mutual certainty. When they finally parted, Colt touched her cheek softly. "I've wanted to do that since Fairfield. Only Fairfield," she teased gently. "I've been wondering about it since that storm and the cave," he smiled, drawing her closer. "I've been falling in love with you since Silver Creek, Belinda Wells. Just took this journey to make me certain." The confession, simple and direct like the man himself, warmed her more than any fire could. "I think I've been falling in love with you too," she admitted. "It just took me longer to recognize it." They slept that night as Colt had suggested, sharing warmth beneath their combined blankets, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm protectively around her. Despite the storm raging outside, Belinda felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Morning brought a transformed landscape, trees laden with snow, the path ahead obscured by white. Colt surveyed it critically after building up the fire and preparing coffee. "We'll wait another day," he decided. "Let some of this melt before attempting the final climb to the pass." The enforced delay, which might have frustrated Belinda earlier in their journey, now seemed almost welcome. They spent the day in quiet companionship, sharing stories of their childhoods, discussing plans for the future now tentatively envisioned together. "I want to build a proper house first thing," Colt told her as they sat wrapped in blankets near the fire. 2 stories with glass windows and a wide porch, room to grow into. "With a kitchen garden," Belinda added, "and perhaps apple trees eventually. Whatever you want." He kissed her temple. The land's good for it. By the following morning, the snow had stopped, and though the path remained challenging, Colt deemed it passable. They packed up camp and proceeded cautiously, the wagon creaking over snow-covered ground, the horses picking their way carefully. The view from the pass was spectacular, mountains stretching in all directions, valleys below filled with mist, distant peaks gleaming in the sunlight. Belinda gasped at the beauty of it, momentarily forgetting the cold and the difficult journey. "Worth the climb?" Colt asked, smiling at her wonder. "Absolutely." The descent on the other side proved less arduous, the snow thinning as they lost elevation. By nightfall, they had reached a lower valley where patches of bare ground showed through melting snow. The weather was milder here, protected by the mountains they'd just traversed. "We've crossed into Idaho territory," Colt announced as they made camp. "Another week or so to Montana, depending on conditions." The knowledge that they were drawing closer to their destination filled Belinda with both anticipation and a touch of apprehension. Their relationship had transformed during this journey, but what would happen when they reached the end? Would the feelings that had blossomed on the trail survive the realities of settling in a new place, building a life? That night, as they sat by the fire after supper, Belinda voiced her concerns. "What happens when we reach Montana, Colt? Really?" He considered her question with his usual thoughtfulness. "That depends on what you want, Belinda." "I meant what I said back in Silver Creek. You're free to build whatever life you choose. And if that life includes you, then I'd consider myself the luckiest man in the territory." He took her hand, his expression serious. "I love you, Belinda. I want to build a life with you, a home, a family if you wish it, but I won't press you for promises now. When we reach my land, take your time, be sure." His understanding and patience only deepened her feelings for him. "Thank you," she said softly, leaning against his shoulder, "for everything." The final week of their journey passed swiftly, the terrain growing gentler as they followed river valleys northward. Spring was more advanced here, wildflowers dotting meadows, trees budding with new growth. They encountered more travelers, mostly settlers heading to establish homesteads or miners seeking fortune in the hills. Crossing into Montana territory brought a visible change in Colt's demeanor, a lightness, an eagerness that made him appear younger. He pointed out landmarks with increased animation, describing the country ahead in vivid detail. "We'll reach Pine Creek tomorrow," he told Belinda one evening, tracing their route on his well-worn map. Small settlement but growing, has a general store, blacksmith, even a small hotel now. And your land, half day's ride beyond, will resupply in town, then head out next morning. His eyes met hers, excitement evident. Almost home. The word resonated with Belinda. Home. She'd had a house in Silver Creek, a business, but it had never truly felt like home, not since William died. The prospect of creating something new, something lasting with this man beside her, filled her with a hope she'd nearly forgotten. Pine Creek proved to be smaller than Silver Creek but bustling with activity. Log buildings lined its single main street, with new construction visible at the edges. People nodded greetings as Colt drove the wagon toward the general store, several calling his name in recognition. "You're known here," Belinda observed, "stopped through several times last year while staking my claim." He helped her down from the wagon. "Good folks, mostly. Building something new together out here." The storekeeper, a robust man named Peterson, greeted Colt warmly. "Quinn, heard you'd finally decided to settle in, and who might this be?" "Belinda Wells," Colt introduced her. "Belinda, this is Howard Peterson, finest storekeeper in 3 territories." "Miss Wells," Peterson nodded respectfully. "Welcome to Pine Creek. You'll be staying at Quinn's place then." The assumption brought color to Belinda's cheeks, but Colt answered smoothly. "Miss Wells will be deciding her arrangements once we reach my land. We've had a long journey from Wyoming." They purchased supplies for the final leg of their journey, and the first weeks on Colt's claim flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition, tools, seed for planting. Belinda added fabric, thread, and other necessities for establishing a household. The total was substantial, but Colt paid without hesitation, much of his savings committed to this new beginning. They stayed that night at the small hotel, again in separate rooms despite their changing relationship. Colt insisted on propriety in town, concerned for Belinda's reputation in what would likely be their community. "Folks out here are building something new," he explained, "but old values still matter. I won't have anyone thinking less of you." Belinda appreciated his consideration, though part of her found it unnecessary after their weeks on the trail together. Still, she understood his reasoning. Their future here would be shaped partly by how they were perceived by their neighbors. Morning brought clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect for the final stage of their journey. Colt was visibly eager as they loaded the wagon and bid farewell to Pine Creek. The trail led northwest, following a creek through rolling hills covered with spring grass and wildflowers. "There," Colt said several hours later, pointing ahead to a valley nestled between protective hills. "That's it." Belinda followed his gaze, taking in the landscape. A creek meandered through the center of the valley, bordered by cottonwoods. The southern slope he'd mentioned was visible, an ideal building site overlooking the whole property. Beyond, grasslands stretched toward distant mountains, perfect for grazing cattle. "It's beautiful," she breathed, understanding now why he'd been so eager to claim this place. 320 acres, Colt said proudly. "Under the Homestead Act, 5 years of improvements and it's mine free and clear. Have you started any building yet? Just a small cabin for now, 1 room but solid." He guided the wagon down the slope toward the creek. "Enough to shelter us while I build something proper." The cabin came into view as they approached the creek, simple but well constructed of logs, with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. Beside it stood a lean-to that would serve as temporary shelter for the horses until a proper barn could be built. Colt helped Belinda down from the wagon, watching her face anxiously as she surveyed what would potentially be her new home. "It's not much yet," he acknowledged, "but it's a beginning." Belinda walked to the cabin, climbed the 2 steps to the porch, and looked out over the valley. From here, she could see the potential. Colt had described the land that would support cattle, the creek that would water gardens and orchards, the hills that would shelter them from harsh weather. Most importantly, she saw the future they could build together. Turning to him, she extended her hand. "Show me inside." The cabin's interior was simple but thoughtfully arranged. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking area beside it. A hand-built table and chairs occupied the center, while a bed frame with a fresh mattress stood against the far wall. Shelves held basic supplies, and windows on 3 sides provided ample light. "You made all this." Belinda asked, impressed by the craftsmanship. Last summer and fall, between cattle drives. Colt watched her nervously. It's just temporary until I can build something worthy of you. It's perfect for now. She turned to him, decision made. A wonderful place to start our life together. Hope and joy transformed his expression. You mean it? You'll stay. I'll stay. Belinda moved closer to him. I love you, Colt Quinn. I think perhaps I've been falling in love with you since that day you stood up to Sheriff Grimes on my behalf. He gathered her into his arms, his kiss expressing everything words couldn't: the joy, the relief, the promise of a future together. When they finally parted, Colt rested his forehead against hers. I should do this properly. He stepped back, then knelt before her. Belinda Wells, will you marry me? Be my wife, my partner in building this place into a home. Tears of happiness filled her eyes. Yes, she answered simply. I will. They were married 2 weeks later in Pine Creek, the local minister officiating, Howard Peterson and his wife serving as witnesses. Belinda wore a new dress she'd made from fabric purchased in town, and Colt a clean shirt and his best vest. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, their vows spoken with certainty born of the journey they'd already shared. News reached them a month later that Sheriff Grimes had been removed from office following complaints about his conduct from several Silver Creek citizens, including Thomas Henderson and the Porters. The new sheriff had no interest in pursuing vendettas across territorial lines. By autumn, Colt had begun work on the larger house he'd promised, 2 stories with glass windows and the wide porch Belinda had envisioned. The cabin became a storeroom once they moved into their new home the following spring. By then, Belinda was expecting their first child, a daughter who would be born in summer. They named her Hope, a testament to what had brought them together and carried them through. As the years passed, the Quinn Ranch prospered. Colt acquired cattle, bred horses, and expanded their holdings. Belinda established a garden that became famous in the region for its produce, and later opened a small school for neighboring children, including their own. Hope was joined by a brother, William, 2 years later, and eventually a second sister, Margaret. The town of Pine Creek grew alongside their family, becoming a respectable settlement with a church, a proper school, and eventually a railroad connection. Belinda sometimes marveled at how far they'd come from that day in Silver Creek, when Sheriff Grimes had ordered her to leave town and Colt had declared they would both go together. What had begun as an act of defiance and protection had led to a love that sustained them through the challenges of frontier life: harsh winters, uncertain harvests, the isolation that sometimes accompanied their chosen path. Through it all, they remained partners in every sense, their bond strengthened by shared purpose and deep affection. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, Belinda took Colt's hand. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Standing up to Sheriff Grimes that day, leaving everything behind, Colt's fingers tightened around hers. Not for a single moment, he answered, the certainty in his voice unchanged from that first declaration in Silver Creek's dusty street. Best decision I ever made was saying those words, then we'll both leave together. Belinda leaned against his shoulder, watching their children play in the yard, the house and land around them a testament to what they'd built together. I'm glad you did, she said softly. I'm glad we did. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, surrounded by the home they'd created, not just the buildings and fields, but the love and life they'd nurtured in this valley far from where their journey had begun. Sheriff Grimes's order to leave town, meant as punishment, had instead opened the door to the greatest blessing of Belinda's life. Sometimes, she reflected, what appears to be an ending is merely the first step toward a far more beautiful beginning.